5, 4. Well, it's a good evening here in Queensland. It's 7 o'clock, 9 o'clock in New Zealand. It's actually 4 p.m. in Thailand, where our guest is currently residing. And our friends in the UK, it's 10 o'clock. And Julia has actually organised this fantastic interview with Atira Tan. And what we're going to do before we actually introduce you, we've just got this little video clip. It goes for 3 minutes 23, and it will actually enforce, the whole position of why we've got Atira on the show tonight. Yeah, looking forward to it. Stand by.
Namaste, everybody. I'm Atira, and my deepest passion is really helping like-minded people like yourself who are really passionate about social change and positive impact projects to bring your idea and vision into life. So I'm the CEO and the director of Art to Healing, and I've also spearheaded a lot of social change and innovative projects that have raised in total $60,000, and I've worked with many sex traffic survivors from all over the world, which is my deepest passion, helping them to live a life free of slavery. So I understand how sometimes when you get a really inspiring idea that just kind of like comes at you, when you feel so enthusiastic, you feel alive, you feel all fired up for this vision, and then in a couple of weeks or after a couple of months, the fears, the doubts, and sometimes the overwhelm of what actions to take in order to bring your vision to life, they all kind of start swimming in the soup, and then our vision gets lost with all these different feelings. And then this is why I created the 3-day e-course called Clarifying Your Vision. So this e-course will give you very helpful tools through spiritual practices like yoga and meditation to help you get really clear on your why, on the heart of your vision, to really anchor that vision into your body. From here, I'm going to be teaching you ways of finding that balance and focus to create those projects and to manifest them into reality, and also to find your own personal power to make these dreams a reality. The e-course, which is over 3 days, I will be emailing you 90-minute meditation and yoga videos to help inspire you to get things fired up again. In addition to that, I'll also be giving you some journal questions, which are optional, and also some art therapy exercises that are really fun to help deepen that process for you. So all you need in this intensive, you can do it whenever. You don't have to do it in the 3 days. You have them to keep, and whenever you're free, you can get on your mat. You can do it in the pace and at the comfort of your own home. And all you need is a yoga mat, a cushion, a journal, and a pen, and a really open heart to reconnect to your vision. In addition, I'm also offering you, after the intensive, if there are things that start percolating or coming out that you need to be processed, I'm offering a half an hour free phone consultation where you can call me, and we can debrief a little bit of your insights of what came up for you. So I really hope that this e-course is extremely helpful in creating your vision for social impact in the world. And I'm doing this because I really believe that the world needs you, and the world needs your unique gifts. So thank you so much. I hope that you sign up to the e-course, and I hope you have a beautiful day. Namaste.
All right. Namaste, everyone. Welcome to our show. We've got Jeffrey Shaw and Atira Tan and myself, Julia Chai, on Dreaming the New Dream. We're so delighted to have Atira. You've just sort of heard about her amazing course that she offers. It's very rare to have people who are combining spiritual pursuit and social justice. And Atira's got a really special story, especially in relationship to girls who have been sex trafficked. So Atira, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Perhaps we can just start off with your background. So when you were 5 years old, where would we have found you as a 5-year-old? Where would you have been?
When I was 5, I was in Singapore. Yeah.
And what kind of family did you grow up in? Did you grow up in one of those HDB flats or in a villa or on a kampong?
I did. I grew up, my parents are both, working class. They were primary school teachers. So I grew up in a really humble HDB flat, in Singapore.
That's great. Okay. And then when you were 15 years old, where in the world were you by then?
Actually, when I was 15, I was still in Singapore in the same kind of humble HDB flat. But yeah, when I was 16, after I finished my O-levels, I moved to Australia, to Melbourne. And I have been a resident of Melbourne ever since.
And what was that like, moving from Singapore to Melbourne?
It was fantastic. Yeah, it was great. It was great. I'm not sure if you know, the political situation in Singapore. And Singapore is a very interesting country because, it was colonized. And Singapore itself doesn't have very much culture. It doesn't have, a deep kind of sense of, for example, the culture that comes from France or the culture that comes from China. It's really kind of a hub, a country that was created by, the colonization. So living in Singapore is very interesting because the heart of Singapore is really about economy and it's about money. And with money comes power and greed. And there is not very much nature in Singapore, even though it's an island country and city. And there is not a lot of, connection, I think, with nature. And as a result, I really do feel that impacts the population and our kind of connection to ourselves and the connection to our resources and spirituality and the natural world. So even though I was born in Singapore, I never really connected with the culture of Singapore, which is a culture around economy and money and, perfectionism and striving, to achieve something.
Yeah, I know what you mean, because I grew up in Hong Kong and it was similar. When I was in Singapore, when I was working in Singapore in 94 to 97, it was about the 4 C's. Obtaining the 4 C's, like you could only go out with somebody who had the 4 C's. So Jeff, credit card. What else was it? A car. And then I think it was a flat and then something else. So that was
a condominium, right? Yeah. Okay.
A condominium.
So
yeah.
I mean, when we grow up in a culture, I think where the focus and the essence of the culture is around superficial objects. It's and for a young person that doesn't resonate with that's interested in something much deeper and richer and more meaningful, it's a really hard place to kind of grow up in. And so when I left Singapore and moved to Australia, I was really happy to be away from, that culture of materialism. But also, I think what was really important for me is the connection with nature, which Australia is abundant in. And when I remember, going on my first camping experience when I was 16 years old, and really, was such a mystical and spiritual experience for me. And that relationship with nature has never diminished, since then. So yeah, it was a very good experience for me to move to Australia and also to, connect with other, like-minded individuals who are passionate about spirituality, passionate about really deepening our connection to life, and a more progressive way of thinking, so to speak.
Oh, I think your parents definitely picked the right city. Melbourne's got a very strong social justice history and tradition, doesn't it?
Sure.
Yeah. So what did you study here as well, or what did you do once you finished with school?
Yeah, so when I finished my year 11 and 12, I did a Bachelor in Fine Arts. And then I went on to studying, counseling, transpersonal art therapy. I have a master's in clinical art therapy with La Trobe, and I'm currently a PhD candidate.
Very good.
And then you took a gap year to Asia, and you had a big big sort of big event that happened over there that sort of brought you onto this path on which you currently are.
Yeah. I mean, being like, Singapore level Asian, I poured a lot of focus into, my studies in my, late teens, early 20s. And I think by the time I was 23 or 24, I was really ready to, travel the world and pour more of my energy really into creative pursuits. I was a painter and a sculptor, in school, and then I moved to being a creative art therapist. But at the heart, I really loved music and dance and art, and wanted to take time out to nourish that aspect of myself. But also, I've always been, a person that loves travel and loves culture and different different ways of living, how people live, and also not just that, but the human spirit. I'm deeply curious about the human spirit. So my intention for leaving, and I worked 4 jobs for many years to save up that amount of money to go traveling, and I had one round the world ticket. I wanted to go to Asia, because that was like the route that I was going through: Asia, India, and then Europe and Africa and then South America. But the first country that I landed in was, I landed in Thailand, but then I immediately actually went to Cambodia and lived in Cambodia for a longish period of time. And my direction really changed course when I landed in Phnom Penh.
So tell us about it. We're all ears.
Yeah. So when I arrived in Phnom Penh, it was probably about 7 years after the war had ended. And so Cambodia at that time, was post-war, and I'd never seen a country that was post-war. So it was quite intense. I mean, you would, still walk in the villages, and you had to be very wary of like landmines that was still there. There was a huge kind of unspoken cloud of mistrust, within the country itself from what happened. And more than that, there was a lot of poverty, there was a lot of homelessness, just kind of the post-war, scenario. And part of that was, there were a lot of homeless people on the streets, and I was living in an area where there was quite a cluster of like homeless families in the area that I was living. And the way that they would make money was actually to sell their daughters, and their daughters were very young. They were probably around the age group of like 8 to 12 years old. And every night they would kind of parade their daughters out on the streets, and sometimes there were foreign men that would come, or local men that would come. And that was quite shocking to me. Even my childhood is nowhere near perfect, but just to kind of see that that happen just right on the corner of my street, it really affected me a lot, as it would anybody. When you see kind of suffering and when you see injustice, it's not okay. And I think that part of being human is to really feel that inside. And I felt that, deeply, and I felt so many different feelings, very extreme kind of emotions. I believe still up to this day that the using children for sex is something that is completely not okay and insidious and very, very wrong. And to have that kind of displayed publicly, and with nobody, condoning it, is horrifying. It really is horrifying, and it made me feel very, very angry. It made me feel extremely sad, extremely sad, because I was walking past these families every day, you know, to go home. So I could see these girls, and you know, they were completely numb and frozen and hopeless, you know, just so sad, so sad. And the worst thing I think that you could do to any human being really is that taking away of that innocence, because innocence is, the quality of innocence is something that is so vital, and it's something that's so precious, and it's actually something that we as a collective need to protect and take care of. And when atrocities like this happen, whether it's through war or, you know, sex slavery or trafficking or, you know, child sexual abuse or abuse, that innocence that is so precious takes away, okay, takes away something which is so intrinsically valued in our human spirit. So, you know, it came to a point in time where I realized that I could either stay and do something about what I was seeing, or, you know, I could ignore what I was seeing by not doing something and, you know, continue on my, you know, around the world trip or whatever I was planning to do. And the energy in my body was very clear. It was very clear. It was like a no, you know. You cannot live the rest of your life kind of knowing that these kind of things exist in the world, where young children are being sold into child sex slavery on the streets, meters from where I'm living, and not do anything about that. You know, it just kind of a little bit was a no-brainer really for me. And that wisdom and the intelligence came from my body, because there was nothing rational about this decision. You know, I saved, you know, I spent so much time saving and planning for this trip and so on and so forth. And that really was kind of this mind thing. But every cell of my body was like, well, you know, you have a year and you have abundance, you know, and this situation has come to you. Are you going to walk away from this situation and not do anything? The answer was no. No, I'm going to stay, and, you know, I'm going to be curious about what's happening. And I think that part of what I was feeling initially was the shock and the overwhelm that human beings were capable of doing such a thing. And I think that the curiosity was really kind of very great. Like, how could these families sell their daughters into something so terrible? Because it just felt so counterintuitive for me, that, you know, as a woman and, you know, as a human, that, you know, if I did have a child, you know, how could that happen? Why did it happen? Because I really believe that, you know, it's counterintuitive. So something must have happened to the mothers and the fathers, you know, the parents, the family system, to create this kind of hurt and pain for, you know, their own children. So there was a lot of curiosity about that. There was a lot of curiosity about what the stories of these girls were. But more than that, you know, as I really connected to these girls in person, I could also see that there was light still in them, even though, you know, so, you know, in order not to feel that pain, you have to disassociate from your body altogether. And when you have to disassociate from your body altogether, there is a numbness that's there. And it takes a very, very long time to thaw out that numbness and that feeling of being frozen and disconnected from the body. So I was very curious, because despite really kind of seeing that kind of presentation in the girls, I could also see that they were still children. And there is something about children that's like, you know, there's a light in them or, you know, there's a light that cannot, you know, bad things cannot kind of take away. And there was a real impulse inside of me where I really wanted to just reflect that back to them, to these girls, that I wanted them to kind of know that despite what was happening to them, I could still see their light. And perhaps, you know, if they could also connect to that light within themselves, then there could be hope, you know, or that could be like a little glimpse of that journey of recovery. So that was what I was very curious about as well. And there was definitely a very strong impulse there. So I, you know, canceled pretty much postponed my trip. I kept postponing my ticket. And I stayed in Cambodia. I was very lucky because I did a lot of research and I spoke to a lot of people about this issue. And at that time, Phnom Penh really was a very interesting kind of buzzing international hub of a community where people really came to Cambodia to help. It was full of a lot of activists. It was full of very intelligent people really wanting to help and create a change in that post-war system. And there were many people that were very deeply affected and really cared a lot for the suffering that was there at the moment. So it was easy to mingle and to have conversations and to network and to connect. And through that, I learned a little bit more about, sex trafficking in Cambodia. It was terrible, terrible, terrible. The more I dug, the sadder I got. And with the skills that I had, as a counselor and an art therapist, I ended up working for an organization, quite a anti-trafficking organization in Phnom Penh. And through that experience, got to hear a lot of stories of these girls and women. And one of the things that I noticed when I was, talking to people, and also, in my experience working as a therapist in the shelter, the different shelters with these women, I noticed that their mental health kind of structures were really not so great. People have very low education, so the counselors, psychologists that worked there basically, did not really have an understanding of trauma, how trauma affects the nervous system, how trauma affects the different categories of trauma, like developmental trauma, trauma that has to do with sexual abuse, which is really about the violation of boundaries. They didn't really know how to work with that. So the kind of counseling was really consisted at that time of like advice giving, solution focused therapies, which is great for brainstorming and finding, ways out of like stuck situations. But the deeper kind of developmental trauma of the, wounds of abandonment and rejection from their families, the poverty that, these girls had experienced, and a whole kind of, this is so complex, the trauma that they experience. There is no real healing that can happen. You can give a woman or a girl as much, education and, food and shelter as you can give. But at the end of the day, if they're still stuck in these kind of negative belief patterns, or if there's unresolved trauma in their bodies and in the system, in the minds, when they leave the shelter, which will have to happen eventually, because the stakeholders will only give a certain amount of money to really look after these girls in the shelters. What happens is that they go through an unsuccessful recovery. They go through an unsuccessful reintegration. And I saw this trend where, at that time, sex trafficking really was a trend in the NGO world. So there's like billions of dollars which pour into, sex slavery, but nothing really gets poured into mental health. And if a woman doesn't have the confidence, if there is no kind of focus on mental health and helping her to resolve the trauma in her body and get her to really believe in herself and that she's able to create a life free of slavery, then all of these efforts really go to naught, because these women still struggle. They struggle from post-traumatic stress disorder. They struggle from depression and anxiety. And most of the time, because you've had to disconnect and disassociate from your body with the trauma that they've been through, you can't survive in the outside world. Because when you leave the shelter, a woman has to go through intense amount of discrimination from her community. She has experienced a lot of developmental trauma that really affects the brain and affects how we perceive the world. And if the world feels like an unsafe and dangerous place, when you leave the shelter, then you are constantly in fight or flight or freeze. And you cannot relax. If you cannot relax in your community, or if you're trying to build a life, for yourself that's free from slavery, and if you're not feeling that felt sense of safety in the body, very, very little things can happen, because you're constantly hypervigilant. You're constantly feeling like you're in danger. You don't have the wisdom of your body to tell you what's right or wrong. These girls don't have good boundaries. So any person that comes up to them that says, I can get you a job somewhere else, they're going to follow that person, because they have no sense of what is right or what is wrong, or who they are and how they are separate from other people. So they are unable to kind of make good decisions for themselves. And without all of that, it's a full recovery is really not possible from child sex slavery. So as a result, as I got to really kind of hear the stories of really like hundreds and hundreds of women, I realized how important it was, how mental health and trauma recovery were just so imperative and vital to the recovery of child sex slaves if you want them to live lives free from slavery. And I set up Art to Healing, which is the charity that I'm a co-director of. And for the past, I think 16 years or more, this is our focus of our organization, to really help support the mental health recovery of child sex slaves, to help the trauma resolution of these child sex slaves, so that, the end goal that we really support and we hope for is the successful reintegration back into their community, where they can have the chance and the opportunity to live lives, free, not just from slavery, but really from those core woundings of rejection and abandonment and low self-esteem and, worthlessness, so that they can reclaim who they really are, and reclaim their light. So that intention that I have, which is really kind of like reflecting the light, their essence, that I saw, like, I don't know, 16 or so years ago, that is still very much the same. That is still that same motivational drive. We're not really here to rescue or to, save anybody. But what we want to do is to support people on that journey of recovery, and to be that support, to reflect, this essence, their essence or their light, which is still theirs. It's still theirs. Their sense of self, that light that all humans have, that all sentient beings have, for themselves, so that as they reconnect to that light, as they reconnect to their bodies and that greater aspect of themselves, they can be free. Yeah, they can be free.
Yeah. Well, thanks for sharing that, Atira. I mean, as you're talking about it, yes, I agree with you that self-esteem, knowing that they're more than what happened to them, is so important. Certainly when I was learning hypnotherapy, one of the scripts that touched me deepest was actually a story that they told about a person who held up a $20 piece, and then he basically said, this $20 piece, is this a value to you? And of course everybody went, yes, because it's worth money, right? And then he said, well, if I tear this $20 piece, is it still a value to you? And everybody went, yep. You can still stick it together and use it. And then he says, well, what about if I stamp on it? And he basically put it under the shoe and ground his foot into it. Would you still take it? And still everybody's going, yes. And, and then he basically said, this story says, look, whatever happens to you, you are like this $20 piece. You've been cut into pieces, you've been ground into the ground, you've been tarnished. It doesn't matter. You're still valuable and precious to people who care about you. And that story was really, I think, just touches. It gives you hope, because in the narrative of society, certainly when you're a kid, you grow up with stories of heroes and heroines. But when something like that happens to you, you get sold and you get used, like a commodity. That doesn't fit any of the narratives that we grow up with. So then the kids don't really know where they fit in, do they? And they just don't have an identity. So I'm actually interested because at Milpera State School, which is like the Queensland school here for refugees and immigrants, and they often do have, kids from Syria or from war-torn countries or Africa or Somalia who've been through lots of trauma. They also have an art program, art therapy and a music therapy program. And I volunteered there, so I've sort of seen what they do, and they really enable the kids to basically put down in pictures or art or to actually tell their story. So I kind of acknowledge that. And then, the idea is to get it out and then get it off their chest, and then allow them to, through acting and through playing new roles, try out different roles. What are the main strategies that you use in your foundation for the trauma recovery?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So the art is a really great way in because, like what you're saying, the asylum seekers and refugees and the child sex slaves that I work with, they have experienced so much atrocity and so much pain that words are really, really hard to express. Now, words come from the neocortex. It comes from this part of the brain where, there is, meaning, there is, and the emotional experience of what happens when there is a traumatic experience, it's beyond this neocortex, and language sometimes is difficult to express that or to fully to fully communicate what's really happening in your inner world. Words can be very difficult as a medium. In addition, with developmental trauma, especially with these girls, the youngest girl or child that I've worked with was 1.5 years. So if you imagine, when you're 1.5 years or you're 2 years or 4 years, 5 years, your brain is still developing. So if there is something that stunts the brain, like something like a trauma that happens, then your brain never really fully, it's harder, or it takes more time for the brain to fully develop. And the last part of the brain that fully develops is like the neocortex. And if that part of the brain is not fully developed, then these children actually they cannot use language or words to express what's happened to them. So in that way, the expressive arts is fantastic because, visual art therapy, you can express in images, in words. You also kind of use the body as well. We also do a lot of drama therapy. We do a lot of, music. That's, we work with a multimodal approach. But as my, as an experience, in my experience as an art therapist, the art is really not enough, because the key to trauma recovery is really within the body. So trauma is lodged in the nervous system. And when the body is not, the intelligence of the body, when the instinct of the body, when the kind of psychophysiology of the body is not taken into account in trauma resolution, there's a big kind of part that is missing. And I noticed that as well as an art therapist. I was doing all the kind of, right things and running a lot of different programs. And I found that with these girls, because they, as I mentioned, you need to disassociate to survive when a boundary violation happens, especially something like sexual abuse. So in order to reclaim the body, there needs to be a reconnection to the body. Yeah, there needs to be a thawing out. There needs to be, a process where these girls and women can reconnect to their bodies in a safe and gentle and non-invasive way. And that can be very scary because their experiences of what's happened to them is terrifying. But this is key. If a child or woman that's experienced a boundary violation where something's happened to their body, the body keeps score, as Dr. Bessel van der Kolk talks about. So the way through is really the body. So what we do in our organization is we combine a lot of different approaches that seem to work well for these women and children. And the categories of trauma that they experience. And mostly the categories of trauma are, you know, adverse childhood experiences, which is complex trauma, the developmental trauma, the attachment trauma, and it's sexual abuse, which is a boundary violation. And what we offer is a synergy of different modalities that we have researched and found to be very, very intrinsic and vital to the full recovery of these women, which involve trauma resolution, not just like, you know, being able to express yourself. Okay, great, you know, you're able to express yourself, that's fantastic. But trauma is lodged in the nervous system, it's lodged in the body. And just expressing itself doesn't necessarily lead to resolution depending on the severity of the trauma that they've experienced. So sometimes there are these unresolved, like fight, flight, freeze responses that these girls have never had the safety to experiment or to explore or really to release out of the body. So then the trauma, they are stuck in the trauma vortex, right? So the work that we do involves a lot of different things. It involves, you know, the creative arts as a way in. It involves the somatic psychology approaches, such as like somatic experiencing. We do a lot of work with reproductive health and sexual health, as well as a way in to help women, or these girls and women, reclaim that connection to their sexuality, but also to that part of the body that has been harmed for so long. You know, what is your, you know, relationship to who you are as a woman? Because so much of this is about gender-based violence. And if we're talking about issues with gender-based violence, then we need to have an exploration of gender identity. Yeah. And I work mostly in Asia, and I'm an Asian woman that grew up in Asia. I really understand what it's like to have to live in a cultural paradigm where women are seen less equal to men. And still in the countries that I work with, there's so many different like cultural implications, like, for example, the implication of karma, for instance. So, you know, in a lot of the Buddhist and also Hindu countries that we work with, they believe in karma. So if you're a child sex slave, it means that you've done something bad in the past life that, number one, created you to be born as a woman because you're less than a man. And number two, you know, you deserve being a child sex slave because you did something terrible in the past life. Okay. And this kind of cultural paradigm and belief perpetuates the trauma vortex, because these girls feel that in order, you know, that they have to use this life to repay back the debt, the karmic debt and bondage that they had in the last life. And so a lot of them stay in the spiral and cycle of sex slavery. So all of these different cultural, you know, like the issue of child sex slavery is not just child sex slavery. It's, you know, it's transpersonal, it is cultural, it's ancestral, it's intergenerational, you know, it really is multidimensional and complex. And at Art to Healing, we are curious about the different dimensions that are important to a successful reintegration, and provide the tools and the programs and the research that can kind of aid that recovery. And we've found that, you know, the body is very, very important, and helping women to reclaim that connection to their wombs, you know, their vaginas, their ovaries, their cycles, you know, who are you as a woman? What does this mean? Yeah. That is really important, because we are talking about an issue which is based on gender, and it's a collective trauma. So in essence, we kind of use many different tools to support the recovery of the women and children we work with. And as I mentioned, the body is a very, very big part of it. And, you know, the new emerging kind of neuroscience on trauma is a very, very big part of what we do. And also research is a very big part of what we do as well, because we're constantly trying to understand what works and what doesn't work with this target population.
So which countries are you currently active with in terms of research projects? You mentioned earlier that you travel quite a bit.
Yeah, so at the moment, we kind of COVID has really been a huge kind of factor in our international programs. At the moment, we're doing a big research project in Nepal because we have just finished kind of running in a collaboration with Lotus Circle International from America. We've been running a somatic experiencing kind of 1-year training program specific to recovery from sexual violence, trafficking, and slavery. So we kind of wrapped that program up very in a very grateful way. I'm very happy that we wrapped it up before COVID started, just as COVID started happening. And so we have a whole kind of multitude of research that we are, currently writing, evaluating, and researching to see how somatic experiencing and some of the approaches that we are kind of educating anti-trafficking organizations to be more trauma-informed, specifically on sexual abuse and, slavery and trafficking, whether it is successful or not successful, and what are some of the interventions that are working and not working. So that's happening in Nepal that's been happening in Nepal at the moment.
Yeah, right. Atira, sounds like a wonderful project. I'm just going to ask a question, sort of bearing in mind the audience. And, we know about sex trafficking from different sources. More recently, we've had the Jeffrey Epstein series on Netflix and all the news. But I know from the Sisters of Mercy in Australia that 5 years or 6 years ago, they did a story about sex trafficking in Asia, and it was pretty scary. If anybody has got daughters, just to see how much organized crime was involved and how these girls just pretty much get bundled off the street and passports taken away, injected with heroin straight away and locked away. And I'm just mindful that when we spoke about it, we just started off where you started off, which was on the streets of Cambodia with families after war selling their girls on the street. But that wasn't really organized. In terms of the people that you are dealing with, the victims, and you've obviously been doing that for a long time, what's your impression? Is sort of the actual sex traffickers? Is it organized crime, or is it just local? And is awareness increasing enough in the local countries, including like Cambodia, for it to become actually properly illegal and hopefully soon a thing of the past?
Can I just add something to that? With China, with the one-child policy, they're looking for boys, and there's a lack of females to carry on their whole family line. My understanding is that they're actually moving in and looking for females from Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, Thailand to add to their pool. Is that a potential opportunity for the girls to perhaps live in a new environment? Just an add-on to what Julia was just saying.
The answer to your question is one which is quite horrific, because human slavery comes number 3 underneath the profit of war and also weapons. So we're looking at the different things in the world that are gross, like gross profit, gross income. So you have weapons, that's like billions and billions of dollars. Then you have pharmaceutical and drugs as well. Drugs in the black market, which is also billions and billions of dollars. And then the third one is actually human slavery. So human slavery is $150 billion industry. It's $150 billion industry. It is a very low risk, which means that these girls, the traffickers, get on average per year, they can get $100,000 from one woman. And these girls that I work with, they are sold I have worked with girls that are sold in exchange for a cow, in exchange for a refrigerator, in exchange for, I don't know, like $200-300 US, or even less. So I would like, I am very passionate about this, and you can tell this is not just like, oh, Jeffrey Epstein or whatever. This is something which is real and is huge and is beyond. It's not just about China or, the one-child policy. This is something which is insidious, and it covers the world in magnitude. Okay, it's not just like families selling their children. Okay, yes, I work with families selling their children, but they sell their children to, a business. This is a business, a business that you cannot even imagine how big it is. This is a business that involves politicians, that involve people that have a lot of money, that have a lot of power, that, it's even beyond actually like my capacity to really understand that magnitude. But I just want to give you those figures, because those figures, $150 billion, okay, that was the estimate quite a few years ago. And I'm sure that now, with COVID and all of these like different the instability of the world, what it creates is a lot more a rise in these issues that are really very, very bad, and human slavery is just one of that. So I hope that in this short period of time I've answered your question. This area of child sex slavery is bigger than you can ever think of. It is everywhere. There is no country in the world that doesn't have any form of sex slavery. Every country that you can think of in the planet has this, okay, as part of that invisible field. Okay, so whether it is, I work with, obviously, you look at the porn industry, which is happening now, that's a form of slavery. I worked with, survivors that when they are young, they are sold into porn sites. These are big organized, like in this, it's an industry. It's an industry that preys on vulnerable girls, vulnerable families that have been through a lot of trauma and have been through a lot of pain, girls that are very innocent, and they don't have a lot of education. And even if they have like education, this is an industry which preys on pain. Okay, and then it creates more pain, and it creates more pain, and it creates more pain. And as an example, just look at the porn industry on the internet at the moment. What is our relationship to sexuality? It is extremely warped, it doesn't have any respect for, men or girls or women or children. Yeah, and you can access that at any time on the internet. Just look at that. This okay. So I'm just trying to share the magnitude of child sex slavery. It's something that's very real. It's not just, in China, Laos, or Southeast Asia. It's something which is, it's something big and very heavy and very cruel. And it stretches through all the different levels, all the different populations, all the different countries that you can imagine. And it's right here, okay, in Queensland, in Melbourne, right here in Koh Phangan, where I live, in Thailand, in Bangkok, in Pattaya. They're not just like these hotspots. It happens everywhere, okay? Even in Victoria, even in Melbourne. So this is really an issue. It's an issue. And unfortunately, it's my belief that there is not enough support to stop this issue, because it is so complex. As an organization, we have been functioning for 15 years. We hardly get funding for mental health in child sex slavery. And we do great work, and the work that we've done, we've published it academically in peer-reviewed journals. We hardly get any funding. It is a very, very small world. It's not, you know, you can see like child sex slavery as like, you know, I don't know, the Amazon River or something. You know, it's big and it has a current and a flow. And the people that are trying to stop that, the current, there's not a lot of current, okay? So it feels like we're swimming upstream a lot. And there is not a lot of support. You know, there's a lot of support in like food and education and shelter and so on and so forth. But the deeper stuff that is unseen, like mental health recovery, okay? Like the emotional health and well-being of these girls, and actually mapping the how to say, the journey of recovery for these girls holistically. No one has ever done that before, you know? And so it really feels like we're swimming upstream because, you know, as a international program director, I have never been paid. Well, you know, I don't get paid for what I do. We don't get paid, you know, we're just a volunteer organization. There's very, very little support and income and funding that comes through for this, you know, for wanting to support the recovery of this target population. So there's not very, very balanced. So to answer your question, no, actually people need, I mean, there's so many terrible things happening in the world today. You know, I totally understand that, you know, it's overwhelming. It's so overwhelming. But to answer your question, no, actually the governments, you know, a lot of these big organized crimes syndicates, they're, you know, in Asia, you know, like there's a lot of corruption. They are owned by government officials, you know, they're owned by people in power, and these people in power, they're very manipulative, and they have, you know, a way of putting these things in place because $150 billion. Yeah. So yeah, I'm afraid that, you know, what I have to share is not very positive, but we are very passionate, you know, in what we do, and we're very committed in what we do. And if you would like to learn more or, you know, help out, I really invite everybody to jump on our website. It's arttohealing.org, and be part of that change. Be part of that change, because I really believe that it's possible. It's possible, and I've seen that in the thousands of women and children that we've worked with, that it is possible, that healing and recovery is possible. Despite the odds, despite this huge like Amazonian current of greed and power, that, you know, recovery is possible, and we do it at Art to Healing one girl at a time, because every girl, every heart is valuable, and every heart is valid, and every heart, you know, every person has value to it, and we all have a part to play in this. So yeah, that's what I have to say about this topic.
Yeah. Well, thanks, because I think thanks for giving us that. Yes, the news, even though it's bad news, it's worse than we thought. It's everywhere, but I agree that, you know, what you're doing is so valuable in terms of the women reclaiming, or girls reclaiming, children reclaiming sovereignty over themselves. And it sounds like what you're doing is what a friend of mine jokingly refers to, you know, saving the world one soul at a time. So the best way for people who want to get involved with you would be to contact you through Facebook and the website. Is that right?
Yeah. If you go onto the website, there's a contact form, or you can feel free to email me at atira@atiratan.com. If you would like to make a donation, I would really encourage you to get onto our website and just go on the Donate Now tab to support what we do. If you feel like you would like to volunteer in any way, there's also a volunteer form that you can fill out. Yeah, but feel free to stay in contact and to be involved in the conversation.
Thank you. Jeff, do you have any questions or comments?
No, just a mere male. I've taken it all on because it's a very emotive issue, and I think it's been well known that single white males make these trips to the Philippines and stuff, you know, basically sex trips, you know. I mean, I've heard some really gross stories from business people who've come back from Asia and told me the stories that have happened there, and life is so cheap.
One thing that I would really love to say before I leave this interview is, you know, as I mentioned, like the current of things that are not happening well in the world is quite big at the moment. I mean, like at the moment today, you know, really sitting with Beirut, you know, what's happening in Beirut at the moment, you know, how we're kind of dealing with this whole COVID situation. There is a lot of pain and suffering in the world, in addition to, you know, this huge field of, you know, child sex slavery and what's happening. And what I would really love to leave the listeners who are listening is that, you know, these issues that are happening in the world are overwhelming, and, you know, they can feel overwhelming. However, what my message is that each one of us has the power, and we have the courage and the strength, if we are in a good situation, to create change in the world. And my purpose, you know, and passion is to inspire people, you know, like-minded individuals like ourselves, to connect spirituality and our sense of consciousness with social change. And the social change path is actually a spiritual path that really goes hand in hand. And we have the power, you know, as individuals and a community, to actually create change and impact in any area that breaks our heart. Yeah, it's easy to kind of, I think, focus on ourselves and, you know, the stuff that, you know, is not going well for ourselves at the moment, you know, with COVID and et cetera. And in addition to that, when we can get out of our little kind of individual bubble and look at what is it that inspires me to create some sort of social impact, or some kind of change, you know, how can I contribute to something which is breaking my heart, even in the most small way, you know, that impulse and that energy that comes in, it is something which is very healing for us as well. Yeah. And it's really a very sacred path to be on, this path of bridging our consciousness, spirituality, what we know about spirituality, into action. Because we can sit down and we can meditate for, you know, 20 years, and we can say, oh, you know, I'm so, you know, I've resolved this trauma and that trauma, I'm so enlightened. But until we go into the world and we shift that into action, you know, that action becomes this huge mirror for us. And it is a vessel and a tool where we can really kind of put what we say and what we believe into action. And I believe that this is really, really important, especially with what we're going through right now, you know, in this time of, you know, a lot of collective pain. So what I love to inspire the audience today is to find that, yeah. If there is something that moves you, take some action, whether it's a small action or a big action, it doesn't matter whether it's talking about it or writing about it. Just shift that stagnant, overwhelmed energy and use that energy to create some kind of, you know, social impact in the world. And we need you, and everything is good enough, you know, every small little thing, you know, is good enough, and one person can really make such a huge impact in the world. So that is what I would really love to leave our listeners with, that enthusiasm and the inspiration, if this is your calling, to reach out and to start to fuse those two things together.
Well, thank you very much, Atira. Wow. You know, I was thinking before the show that you're very much like Artemis, but you're like Artemis and a healer and an inspirational coach and a catalyst. But yes, hopefully those of you that are listening now and in the future, we're inspired and we'll reach out that helping hand. And together we can change this from being a broken world, which is why we're here, to a more united world. Thank you very much, Atira. Thank you very much, the listeners. Jeff, do you want to close out, do the honours.
Oh, put me on the spot. It's been a spellbound. I've just been sitting back listening. It was just an amazing story, Atira. I mean, it's not something that you see in mainstream news. You don't see it on the front page of newspapers, certainly in Australia and New Zealand. But I'm sure, at this moment in time, a lot of Australians have always donated money to charities, and we've seen some major issues here with the fires where the money is just been absorbed by the charities and it's not actually gone to the coalface of the people who really deserve it. Listening to you suggests otherwise, that you're the person who's at the coalface who really requires that source of funding. And I just trust that the people that we have throughout the world who've been listening to the radio session here in Brisbane, and those who will be watching the show through the Facebook sites that we stream to, will take up the offer that you've put forward, that you're hands-on in that area. And I'm just going to put up your contact details while we're talking, so they can come directly to you. Yeah, and if something can happen from this small 1 hour conversation, I hope we've been of some major benefit in some small way, maybe a major way, whatever. God bless. I think that's thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you very much, everyone, for this opportunity. Yeah, and thank you to everyone that's been listening. Yeah, a lot of gratitude.
Okay. All right, so what we do is we'll just go end the broadcast here to all our Facebook sites, and then we'll go across back to our radio station, and then we'll be talking to our radio station people, and then I'll switch back, and then if you wish to stay on the green room, that's fine. So I'll just do that. Thank you very much, folks. It's now going past 2 minutes past 8 here in Queensland, 2 minutes past 10 o'clock in New Zealand. New Zealand, that's right. And of course, 2 minutes past 11 in the UK. And Atira, what are you looking at? 5 o'clock? 2 minutes past 5?
Yeah, 3 minutes past 5 in Thailand.
Okay. Okay, so in that